Good morning, people on Facebook. Welcome to our conversation called Sacred Places, Digital Spaces, which is a conversation about blended faith formation. How do we, as Christian leaders, help people to grow in faith both face-to-face and in the digital world? My name's Craig Mitchell. I'm from Port Phillip East Presbytery, which is in the southeast of Melbourne in Victoria. And I'm joined by two wonderful people, Sandy Brodeen. Sandy's from just north of me in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, where she works in a network of churches called the Banyule Network, which is kind of a team ministry with a number of churches, and she's got a particular responsibility as an emerging faith communities minister, and you're going to hear about some of that today. And on the other side of the planet, Mark Berry, who's in Telford near Manchester in the UK, who got up at 5 o'clock this morning, and it's now 6 a.m. there. And they'll say hello in a moment. And Mark works for the Anglican Church. He's had a number of roles, and he's been in the Telford community for over 12 years, Mark, because I met you 12 years ago. And involved in planning church and also in resourcing churches and leaders around mission and faith development and spirituality. And so we're here today to talk about discipleship, spiritual disciplines, what it means to be a faith community. But I'm going to let you two say hi before we go any further.
Hi, Craig. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting us to join you, and I'm really excited to be talking to both of you and having the opportunity to share with each other, but also to hear some questions from others too.
Well, good morning, everybody from the UK. I'm just about waking up. It's nice to be here, and it's nice to have a conversation with my friends from many years in Australia. So yes, about 15 years Safe Space has been going, Craig. So good morning, everyone.
So today we're going to talk about practice and reflect on practice, both from Sandy and Mark's experience, and also talk about some of the issues that the church faces in trying to think about how can we be communities of discipleship 24/7 and not just for an hour on Sunday, and not just think about the digital space being the projecting of our worship service. How do we actually have a fuller view of life in the world and discipleship? So that's the idea, and we decided to start and finish this session with something contemplative. And so I've asked both Sandy and Mark to provide us with an exercise that we might share in. I'm praying the technology works myself. And so we're going to begin with Sandy, would you like to introduce this? Tell us.
So this is just the opening sequence from one of our space contemplative services that's been online. The vision is of the Mullum Creek, which is just down the hill from where I live in Mitcham, even though I am a minister in Banyule. It's actually words from the Iona community, so it's from one of the We Worship books. Just a lovely opening space that talks about entering into a safe space to worship God.
So as you're joining us today, let this be your prayer exercise. And if you don't know this part of the world, it's a lovely part of the world up where Sandy is, then please enjoy this part of God's creation and these words.
This is a sacred space where heaven and earth touch, good and bad fade. In this place of worship, God gathers us into a welcoming embrace, making us all neighbours and calling us all friends. Loving God, you know us as we are, with all our funny ways. Gather us into your warm embrace and hold us in your grace. Let there be no place where we go that is away from your spirit, no place into which we can flee from your presence, not the farthest limits of the sea, nor the place of deepest darkness. Hold on to us and assure us that to you the night is as bright as the brightest day, and the darkness will never extinguish your living light. Amen.
Welcome back. I lived in that part of the world for several years, and it's just up the road and I miss it, but I haven't been able to go anywhere, so that's part of that too. So we want to start today by talking about kind of defining the subject, I suppose. So people talk about spiritual disciplines, they talk about faith practices, they talk about practices of discipleship. There's a recent book called Holy Habits. I'd like to hear your take on what we're talking about today. What do these things mean to you as leaders and as Christians?
Yeah, I think, I liked Andrew Roberts' language of holy habits. And I think there's something about spiritual practices that are about developing healthy habits, just like we develop healthy habits for eating and exercise and relationships, communication. Developing healthy habits in terms of our spiritual life is creating those moments that we do each day or each week or whatever the rhythm that we develop is, to structure ourselves and to create a space for ourselves to engage and particularly to be still and to listen. So I think they're about postures. So they're about getting into that place where I give myself into the moment with God and with others. They're about breathing, I think, for me as well, about that taking in of air and of exhaling as well. So, and I think they're very personal. We've grown up in churches, most of us, where corporate prayer, corporate worship is the main thing we do, and that's great. But I think that personal rhythm, the ebb and flow of life, the breathing in and the breathing out, it's about that for me, about being healthy spiritually.
So as some of you might know, we were planning on having Andrew Roberts out here with us. Manningham and Banyule were going to host him this year, but of course that didn't happen, did it? But Andrew is someone that Claire and I have had a number of conversations with, Claire Dorr from Manningham, and we've been really quite engaged with his approach. We like it because basically what he does is he picks the 10 habits that are in Acts chapter 2 and expands them. And you can basically do whatever you like with it. So one of them is prayer, one of them is reading the Bible. I mean, none of it is rocket science, really. It's all fairly obvious Christian practice. Gladness and generosity, sharing with others, eating together, hospitality. So they're all, as you say, postures, that you can eat together. But what does it mean to do that as a sacred practice? What does it actually mean, not just to share food, but to break bread with one another in a way that deepens our relationships with each other and with God? So I think 24/7, certainly, it's certainly not just about 1 hour on Sunday. It's about how we live as Christians. It's about how we share our faith with others and invite them into it. It's about how we become a community of faith where our practices and our Christian walk is actually integral, or there's integrity in it, which I think for me is what I hear when Mark says things like it's part of how I breathe. Breathing is absolutely integral, and I think that's what these faith practices probably should be too, integrity.
So for those who don't know, Andrew Roberts is a British Methodist. And there are a whole bunch of books about practices, but he's written a particularly helpful, not just a book called Holy Habits, but a bunch of little it's a curriculum really, which is not just a study stuff, it's a whole bunch of doing stuff as well. I like the notion that practices aren't just doing, they're actually where our belief and action meet. So it's not just doing a whole lot of stuff as Christians, but it's actually the embodiment of our belief, if you like. So being Christian is not just about doctrine. It's about it's about following, I suppose. And one author I read says that practices aren't imitation of Christ; they're participation in Christ. So it's not like we're doing stuff for Jesus to be like Him, but this is actually the life of God in us being enfleshed and embodied, and that kind of thing. So, and I know as we go through, we're going to talk about more about the inner and outward stuff. And also talk about what does embodiment mean in the digital world as part of that as well. So, Mark, you touched on we tend to think about corporate worship, and these are more individual. I want to almost flip that around and say, I think that people tend to think of practices as individual, as opposed from corporate, and I'd like to talk a bit about how practices are both individual and corporate. How, what's it mean to be a community that's actually disciplined, I suppose. That was about 6 questions at once, so you can pick anyone and answer. Really.
I mean, I think that is part of the challenge about how we enmesh, if you like, different spiritual practices. We talk a lot in other spheres around things like learning styles and spirituality styles and all of that. And I think, how as a community we create space for people's different experiences and different spirituality styles and different practices, but actually then how that feeds into others. So I think one of the things that we found over the years is that if we're practicing silence, for example, there are some who will find it very easy and very natural and normal, and that's fine. And there are some who will really struggle with it. And that's where it becomes rich, when we join with those who are struggling with a spiritual practice, where, something that I find easy, I participate with somebody who really struggles with it, and the richness that develops through that, and vice versa. So something about the struggle, which isn't about the, setting the alarm clock and doing the discipline. It's actually about the struggle within it that actually I understand what that means. But creating space. And I remember one of our guys who was a garbage man, I think you call them in Australia, or bin man, we call them here.
Garbo.
And so
yep.
He was up like I was this morning at 5 o'clock every morning. And that we, as a meeting in the evening, and we'd spend some time in silence, you can guarantee that within 3 minutes he was snoring, and that actually, became something that was part of our rhythm, that we were in silence and Terry would have a nap, and that's wonderful. But how you manage that, and how you create the space for people to be who they are in it. But there is that constant sense of struggle of, okay, well, I'm going to create space for you to be who you are, but I'm going to participate with you in that, and vice versa. And that for me is where individual practices mesh with some sense of community practice, where we create the space of hospitality and struggle.
One of the favourite practices I have in our community when we meet together is our prayer is almost always corporate, in terms of when we do a prayer of what we would call the prayer of adoration and thanksgiving at the start of the service. It's actually about us being grateful and being aware of where God has been and where have I experienced God in my life. So it's not just let me repeat some words that somebody has thoughtfully put together that go with the readings. It's actually about us being aware. So it's all of our words. And when we do the Bible, what you might call a Bible engagement, or I call it curated meaning making. So it's my role as a worship curator is to provide things for people to kind of experience that then helps them to think through the passage. But it's actually about all of us doing the practice of biblical interpretation and biblical reading and exploring together. And again, I think, like Mark just said, the richness comes not just when I sit and do a Lectio Divina and hear the voice of God and think deeply and pray deeply, but it happens when I do that in community with others who are also seeking and who might hear a different word to me and might challenge me in a way that makes me uncomfortable, or which encourages me or whatever. So I think deeply personal and deeply corporate and invitational to those beyond. They don't have to be. They're not just for people who are super spiro, kind of can get up at 5 a.m. and do worship every day. They're actually for all of us, whether we're beginner Christians or not even Christians, not even sure what you believe, but just want to have a go, right up to, monks in seclusion in monasteries.
I mean, can I just pick up,
Yep.
Craig, sorry, can I just pick up on, one of the things you said in the last question, which, it struck me. I use the term posture, and I think one of the things that we have wrestled with in safe space is about the posture of Christ, and what does that mean, and what does that look like. And you mentioned in the last question about this correlation of, if you like, the prayer and action, for want of better words. And I think that's a very fuzzy boundary, and I think that's a healthy thing to have a fuzzy boundary, and actually needs to be an intentional thing. Because when we talk about spiritual practices, we tend to think about the act of prayer, contemplation, Lectio Divina, meditation, But things like eating is a spiritual practice. Things like service is a spiritual practice, is an act of engaging with God. And we ran for a few years a night cafe that ran from 11 p.m. through till 5 a.m. on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, and engaged with nightclubbers and homeless and so on. And one it happened to be a New Year's Eve actually, and one New Year's Eve at about 3 o'clock in the morning, we had a lady come out one of the nightclubs and took off her high heels to walk up the street and stood on a broken bottle. And we ended up with her over in our night cafe, and I found myself kneeling on the floor, covered in plastic, and surgical gloves and aprons and all the thing you have to do, cleaning up her feet and taking the bits of glass out. And as I was doing that, I sensed Jesus stood next to her, looking down at me and laughing at me. In my mind, if you like, I looked up and said, "What?" It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was tired and I was being laughed at. And I heard Jesus in my mind say to me, "Now you get it. When I said wash feet, I meant bloody well wash feet." And I think that sense of the, and then actually the funny thing is she was an Irish lady, a traveller, and she looked down at me and she said, "Oh, God bless you, son." And I said to her, I said, "You know what? It just has done." And it wasn't a moment of evangelism. It wasn't a moment of, mission or anything in that sense, but what we generally think that was, it was a spiritual practice. It was getting on my knees in front of somebody and washing their feet as an act of engaging and participating with God and meeting God in that moment. So I think that's when I talk about postures, that's partly what I mean about actually getting down on our knees physically, or whatever that might be, in service, in love, in the way of Christ.
A guy called Brett Webb Mitchell's got a book, and the title is Christly Gestures. So he talks about learning the movements of the body of Christ and infleshing those. And one of the people who writes about communities of practice, because we're talking now about communities of discipleship practice, he's got a term which I'll just save up for, because I rarely get to use it, but I'm going to throw it in now, called legitimate peripheral participation. And what he says is that you learn a craft or a practice firstly by just standing on the edge and watching. So if you're in a community that's learning to pray, you don't have to be the one up front praying. You observe and you try something out. You try serving. You learn to you learn to serve well by being around people who serve well, so to speak. So that what I heard from Sandy earlier was that you can participate in a community that's learning and praying together, and you're doing something together, but you participate differently. God speaks to each person. You make your own contribution. So, but the fact that you're doing it together is different from, okay, everyone go to your own room, and we'll see you next week. So there's that kind of interplay. And Mark, when you were speaking, I was thinking of the few times I went on a summer beach mission in a big team. And again, we were all learning together to do whatever the heck we thought God was calling us to do there. So there was this shared practice learning, in situ, and you learn as much by watching as well as doing, I guess, as part of that. Yeah.
For some reason, Craig, I've got an image of nonnas making gnocchi with their kind of rollers and the kids all being around and learning how to make the pasta together, I mean, that's a really obvious community example of, it's not just churches that do this. We learn by doing it together.
And to us, go on, mate.
So I was just saying, a few years ago, I was in Ukraine, and a lady from the Orthodox Church, a young lady, was talking about the practice of bread making, and I really loved that. She as she was, instead of just talking about it, she made bread as part of this presentation, I guess, seminar, whatever. But she got the bowls out, she got the flour and the water and the sort of very simple 4-ingredient bread recipe. But she talked about how in the Orthodox Church, the women make the bread for the Eucharist, and if the bread doesn't arrive, there is no Eucharist. And the priest can't know whether the bread, he just has to trust his community that they're going to bring the bread. And I love that sense of the bread making itself was a meditation, but it was a meditation that enabled the whole community to participate in the Eucharist. And I sort of love that individual that in a sense created, it was a practice, it was an activity it was a meditation, but it then created the possibility for a corporate experience, a corporate meditation. And I kind of love that whole juxtaposition of the practical with the spiritual, with the active, with the, all of that lovely meshedness of it.
So we're talking about a couple of things today, and for me, one of them is intentionally shaping community around spiritual practices, faith practices, so that they're not this add-on, but they're actually at the heart of being Christian together, is learning to do the things that Christians do together, if you like, and that from a leadership point of view, that's intentional. So I want to leap to talking about communities that you've been a part of, because you've both been a part of forming faith communities that are intentionally formed around Christian practices. So let's hear a bit about some of that, and we've got some photos. If you want to jump to those, we can jump to some of those.
Sure. So
that we kind of see where the rubbers hit the road.
So in the Banyule Network, I've been there for 9 years now. And at the beginning, we founded a Messy Church. Messy Church you'll know about because there's plenty of opportunities to hear about Messy Church, but it was a really good way into creating an intentional all-age community with lots of creativity and people supporting one another. And so we still have that Messy community, and I can tell you a bit later perhaps about Messy Miners and some of the fun stuff we've been doing. About 8 years ago, one of the then 20s, now in her 30s, young women, we were having a coffee, and she said, I just would really like, to sort of start our own worshipping community. And I don't know what it'd be like, but let's start something. And so we started a thing that at that point we called TGIS, Thank God It's Saturday. And the thing about it was really just us talking about what it meant to be Christian, like what was important for us as Christians. And then we only met once a month, and about 3 months in, I took a Rachel Held Evans article along and said, this is Rachel's. It was one of those things she wrote, this is 8 years ago, about, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? Why don't millennials go to church? I think was what the article was about. And so we sat and pulled that apart. And I said to them, so if we did church together, what would it look like? There's plenty of, ways you can do church. What would it look like for us? And so we decided just to play with that. So we started on a Thursday night once a month, having a go at trying some stuff to see what we liked and what worked. And it became very, what the name Space, it's called Space, came from one of them saying, I just want a space where I can be with God. And I went, there's the name, a space to be with God. Fantastic. And so from that, we started a rhythm that was once a month, and then it became once a fortnight. Now it's once a week. And over time, we've tried different things to see what we like. We've found that one of the people particularly has a real gift for leading Taizé. So we have Taizé once a month. One of the people has a real gift for leading Christian meditation. So we have that once a month. And then I lead to sort of, I don't know, whatever comes out of my head, really, different kinds of worship experiences. So sometimes it'll be the Examen, sometimes it's Lectio Divina, sometimes it's Stations, sometimes it's around the faith life of a particular saint. Then about 3 years ago, we had a number of families, and we were starting to think about what intentional worship would be like with children and families. And so we started an intentional Sunday morning community, which is much more bouncy and everybody in. So it doesn't have that lovely, peaceful, contemplative feel. I didn't send you any photos of Space because most of the time we're sitting in a very dark church praying in the dark, and that doesn't lend itself to photography. But there's photos you've got there of the Common Ground community, which you can put up. So this is the one with people playing Jenga, is a group of people praying. There were 3 or 4 different prayer types on the different blocks, and as they pulled out a different block, they had to pray. So one of them was Thanksgiving, one of them was praying for someone who was, I can't remember what they were, different kinds of prayer. So that was, you'll see some of the adults praying together, playing Jenga, which is kind of fun. We've moved from in the church to being in one of the hall rooms. We probably will move back into the church. You'll see there's some photos there with lots of kids in them. Sometimes the kids lead what we're doing. This particular one with us painting was a really lovely contemplative
Sorry, that one.
exercise.
Yep.
That was about, it was one of the fishy sort of stories. And they're painting and talking about the story, talking about the Bible story. That one was had something to do with crack, so that was like trying to do that kintsugi Japanese thing, but on paper as a prayer practice. So people were sort of doing that as they were reading the story. You can see there's a Lectio Divina thing on the side there as well. So these have all been part of intergenerational all-age worship with people of all ages and stages. Here we are. This is when we come together at the end and make meaning together. So we've kind of been off and done our thing. The kids, I'm not sure where they are in that picture. It looks like there's a whole lot of adults, but we've come together and talked about things. That was our third anniversary service. So the prayers are on the floor. And there's some more prayers, it looks like it, on the world globe, and that 4-panel kind of thing that's on the front of the communion table there is was the banner we made at our very first service about the Lord's Prayer. One of the most fun things about Common Ground is whenever I stand behind the communion table there to lead communion, I have to start by saying, okay, can we just move the Lego or the blocks out the way so that as we pass communion round, someone doesn't break their neck? So there's always a kind of element of having to move our stuff out of the way in order to share. So, and Craig, one of our very favourite communion liturgies is that lovely reverse liturgy of yours, which we use quite a lot, and that works beautifully in that community, actually.
See,
and I have no idea why they're wearing glittery capes in that picture. They're obviously making something. This is in the sycamore tree. They're obviously making something.
So when Wendy's saying that we've just learned that if we've only got one holy habit, which is Sunday worship, and they close the church, then you need some more holy habits.
Yep, you're right, Wendy. Someone's asking about your reverse communion liturgy. It's on Craig's blog. Craig can post a link
and
later.
It's in my forthcoming worship book too. There you go. We can send you a link to that. So it's
yes. I'm just noticing David Landers-Morse there in the comments, who's the guy that runs the Sycamore Tree, talking about being present with people outside the church. Community allows us to see what service to the wider world looks like. So, and David, I didn't say, but some of the other things that are part of our wider circle of church for us is people coming in and out of the Sycamore Tree daily. There's things like the Cafe of Dangerous Ideas that David runs and I kind of hang about, which has dangerous speakers coming to speak about all sorts of interesting ideas. And we have a really firm relationship with Alphabet Soup, which is a community of transgender people running their own cafe in the Sycamore Tree. And we come and join them. And they just in February, my favourite thing was in February, just before we went into lockdown, they wanted to invite us for cake. And I love the idea that here they are, it's our church, they're in our cafe, they're running their event in their cafe, and they want the church people to come and join them for cake. That felt like a really lovely moment for me of us all kind of being together and that sacred eating we're talking about.
So Mark, maybe you can talk a bit about your community and how that was formed around spiritual practices as part of that.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to pull that up so I can see it. So you'll see there are actually 4 images, little icons, if you like, on that. So my community is called Safe Space. It's about 15 years old. It was built on the idea that really, if we were going to be missional, which is what our calling was to be, we needed really to focus on discipleship and spiritual practices because they were what would make us missional. I think sometimes we get that the wrong way round, that we're all about the doing, and then we get worried that we get burnt out. And so we said, actually, you know what, we need to develop a community that sustains us being as who we are in our walk with God, and that will help us to be more missional. So there are 4 little icons. The first one in the top corner, the yellow one, is a double Trinity symbol. And that was really that we said, you know, if we were going to be active Christians, we needed to be intentional about being community. And some of that stuff around spiritual practices. So things like eating together, things like being in each other's lives, that the practice of fellowship We're co-invested in this community and in each other. So we give ourselves to each other as fully as we possibly can. The second symbol, I'm going to go down to the bottom corner now. You can just see a blue symbol of a labyrinth. And for us, that was the sense that as a community, our spirituality, if you like, our faith, our worship was lived. It was what happened on the road. It wasn't what we did when we came together, but actually when we come together, we're reflecting on what God has shown us, has said to us, what we've experienced during the week and during the other days when we're not together. So our gatherings, our spiritual practices are reflective rather than instructive. So we see each day as our journey as part of that spiritual practice and as a meditation. So we're pilgrim people, if you like. The third symbol down at the bottom corner is the hand, and that was that actually we wanted to be missional. And for us, missional means participating in the touch of God on people's lives, the way that God connects with other people, rather than a sort of recruitment or attractional thing. We wanted to be there at the moment that God touched people's lives, and we wanted to participate in that. So those three things founded the values, if you like, the DNA of our community: community, pilgrimage, and mission. And then the fourth symbol, the red cross, it's a cross where there are four whales and their tails come together to form the cross. And that's the cross of St. Brendan, because Brendan is our patron saint. And that's all about taking risks, because Brendan set off on a journey across the ocean, not knowing where he was going or what was going to happen. So that sense of, well, because we're strong together as a community, as pilgrims and as folk who want to participate in God's love for the world, then we take risks and we just go for it. And those four things, if you like, are the values of our community. So everything else flows from that. Our spiritual practices come. So when we're developing spiritual practice, we're saying, how does it draw us stronger together as a community? How does it help us understand our place in the world? And how does it help us to hear what God is calling us to do in this moment, in this time? And where is it saying, get on with it, take a risk, do something? So building around those values, rather than we're a community that prays this way or sings this way or meets that way, means that actually it gives us a flexibility to say when things change, if we can't meet physically, if we have to meet digitally, the same values apply. So we're still looking for ways to engage, but just in a different context. And those simple practices, eating together, of participating in each other's lives, of silence, of waiting, of listening, of reading scripture, but also of putting ourselves in the posture of Christ, are the foundations for what our community is. And that's led us to do all sorts of things, to be involved in gang culture, in nightclubs, in football clubs, in people's lives, in our places of work, and so on. That is the foundation of what it is to be a community for us.
Thanks, Mark. What I like about what you both said is, I guess I grew up with a picture of church which was Sunday's the big gathering, and then the really hardcore people, they go to a Bible study during the week, Whereas what I've heard from both of you is smaller communities, home-based, who are trying to be church together, and Sandy mentioned Acts 2 and the Holy Habits, in a way that is sharing life together stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like I think it's a good. I think that's a really important foundation to go into the digital from. That we're not just talking about how do you take some activities and put them online. It's actually about, we've got this intentional community of discipleship, and it's not kind of the optional extra. This is kind of the guts of being church together. Okay, how do we supplement that in the digital world? Does that sound fair?
I think that's exactly right. And Mark's comment back a moment ago about, these are our values, this is who we are, and then we do that online. We do that. This is just another space in which we're doing this. I think that for me, that's exactly what it is. And it goes back to that thing about integrity and the breath being exactly who you are, that we're still doing that. It may look different, it may sound different, it may feel different online, but in fact, we're the same people questing for God in the same way and inviting people in, albeit in different ways in a digital context. So it might be the segue into talking about that, maybe.
I mean, I think there's two things. There's one thing about, I guess, necessity, and that we're looking at a changing context and changing situations, but our values don't change. But the way that we might express them and explore them is going to change with different contexts. I'm a big fan of Marshall McLuhan, and he said quite a lot about technology, obviously, and wrote a lot about it over the years. And because that's the other side, which is opportunity. There's necessity and opportunity. So during this lockdown period that many of us all over the world have experienced, there's a sense of necessity. How do we find new ways to engage because we can't engage in the ways that we're used to? But that actually creates opportunity, and the technology creates opportunity to say, well, okay, maybe we might discover something that is of great value, something that offers us a new way or a different way to engage beyond ourselves, perhaps. So I always want to think, we're put in this difficult situation. We could see it as, it's restrictive. We can't do the things we used to. But actually, I would say, look, this necessity might create an opportunity to find ways which are richer and deeper, or might create a way for engaging with others in a different space, in a different way. So let's see it as a creative space rather than and Marshall McLuhan said, when you get a new technology, what happens is the first generation struggles with it, can't cope with it, doesn't want to participate in it. The second generation uses the new technology to do the old job, so our websites look like notice boards or whatever. And then the third generation actually says, but what does this technology offer us as something new? What does its processes, its practices mean? How does that help us discover something else? And he goes on to say that our age of anxiety is in great part the result of trying to do today's jobs with yesterday's tools and yesterday's concepts. So maybe this offers us an opportunity to find today's tools and today's concepts.
That's a great segue into what have you learned about taking some of your face-to-face life online?
I guess one of the things that I've learned, sorry, Sandy, for jumping in.
No, I was going to say you're going first.
Is that, we have a tendency to box ourselves and we do our things behind our walls. Well, when you do something online, you can't. It's out there. It's open. It is by its nature participatory unless we shut ourselves in Zoom rooms. Well, and that would be a shame, So for me, what I've learned is that the digital space offers us a new way to engage, just like we're doing now. And look at us, we're having a conversation that's spanning the globe, and that's and we're learning together. And so the thing for me that the digital world has offered is it's blown open the doors and created a new world where we can engage beyond our borders and outside of our buildings. And I don't want to lose that, because to me that's really exciting.
And both the synchronous and the asynchronous are good too. We're talking live across the world with a 15-second delay at Facebook, and there'll be a whole bunch of people who'll come and watch the video afterwards.
Yeah. We found out we did. Sorry, go on, Sandy.
I was going to say we've never thought about asynchronous and synchronous before. I don't think we've ever talked about, how does this work as a synchronous community? How does this work as an asynchronous community? And yet we're finding ourselves having that conversation constantly now, which I think is really helpful. I wonder almost whether we need to explain that in case there's people who don't.
Yes, we do. Go right ahead, Sandy.
So if we're synchronous, we're all doing the same thing together. It's Sunday morning, it's 10 a.m, we're all in the building, we're all facing the front, we're all singing the same hymn. It's synchronous. We're all in synchronicity with one another. Asynchronous is when we do things at different times in different spaces. So, we could be watching the service online. In our case, for Space, it runs on Facebook. So you can join it on Facebook, watch it on Facebook, and comment as it's happening live. You can go back and watch it later on Facebook. It's also on Vimeo, so some people go and watch it then. You might just watch a little bit of it. You might watch all of it. You might watch it at a different time. There's all sorts of different places and ways. But blogs and all sorts of other things allow for asynchronous. WhatsApp and various things allow for it too.
So Sandy, you were doing stuff online before COVID hit, weren't you?
Yes, certainly.
So just talk a bit about a couple of examples of what you were doing and how, what the shift has meant, or what stayed the same or what shifted.
I mean, we had tried things like book groups and various things online. We were doing an awful lot more face-to-face than online and trying to do it very openly. But I think what's been interesting for me has been the move of some of the face-to-face stuff to digital. One of the loveliest examples was we'd started a Holy Habits Lenten study about prayer, and I had put together a whole lot of prayer resources, and you can find those on the CTM website if you want to have a look later on. They got rearranged by CTM to be used by other people, and so I had this little group of people in their 70s and 80s who had started that together in a room in the old-fashioned we met together kind of way, and then after 2 weeks we had to do it online, and suddenly we were having this conversation about prayer and how our prayer life was going. Now that Lenten study is still going, so we're now in October. We're still, the same group is still meeting. What I love about it the most is the way that their prayer lives are all deepening. They continue to be surprised and excited by that. Their relationships with one another and me, our relationships with one another have really deepened beautifully. And I've said to them a few times, that's one of my favourite hours of the week. Now, I wouldn't have expected to be still leading a Lenten study in October and be calling that one of my favourite hours of the week, but that's just been a glorious gift, really, for all of us. A number of those people had some really significant, very messy things happening in their families, and it's allowed us to pray for one another, and often that'll come as a text message or a kind of, oh, this has happened now, so-and-so needs some prayer now, can you pray? And so there's a group of 70 and 80-year-olds using the technology to interact with one another and pray together, which is just superb. What I've called the curated meaning making activities are now going home in a number of ways. So we do them online on screen as part of Sunday morning, but they go home via Facebook and via an email as well. So they go out home in a number of different ways. They range from things like basic prayer practices like Lectio Divina with the passage to an image to do Visio Divina with, to some creative art sort of stuff. And people then are able to respond by posting back their photos and what they've done. We're thinking the next phase for that will be to have a blog so that we can do it asynchronously. So one of the young guys in his 20s was saying to me the other day, I really need to I need to be more accountable about how I read the Bible, and how do we find a way that I can be more accountable about how I read the Bible, not just kind of coming and listening on a Sunday morning, but really doing it during the week. And I'm saying, well, funnily enough, we have these activities. What's a way that we can get lots of people to be doing those during the week and talking to each other? Now, we could do something on Zoom, but he does shift work. So shift work makes it very hard. You can't say evenings or daytimes are going to be better. So asynchronous will be better, we think. So now whether that stays that way or we add a Zoom chat, it won't matter. We'll just do what works, play with it. If it doesn't work, we'll do something else.
So, Sandy, I'll come to you in a moment, Mark. I'm just reading some of the comments here. So what you're describing sounds quite participatory. It doesn't just sound like, we've got a church website, we're going to put something on, go and watch it if you like. You seem to me to be describing a couple of communities that are interacting in multiple ways, and they're kind of playing with that or exploring that as part of their life together. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. The most fun example, if you want to go to that picture of the messy miners,
let's do that.
The most fun example, so our messy church has met via Zoom. Some of them have been on Sunday morning doing this stuff together, and we've met by Zoom. And I had a play date with one of the mums and some of the kids in the holidays in June, and the mum and I couldn't get a word in edgeways because the kids were trying to play Minecraft in the background. And the mum said to me, it'd be fun if we could, do Minecraft as church. And I went, well, that's a bizarre idea. And then I floated it past one of the other people in the community. He said, actually, I know some people that have been doing that in Canberra. We could talk to them. So we got a whole lot of resources about how to do it. And the best part of this is I really don't understand how Minecraft works. And I certainly can't log on and create stuff, but the kids can, and they are creating the story. So this is Noah's Ark from the last story we did. They created the entire story. So we actually watched Noah's Ark happen. The Ark went out, and there are no doves, so we had a chicken that went out and landed on an island because we couldn't, there's no olive. So and then there's the ark coming to land, and there's the rainbow, and all those little people you can see floating around on top of the rainbow are the kids listening to the story. And then we prayed in Minecraft, and prayer in Minecraft involved blowing stuff up. So I asked them to think about things they were worried about or things they wanted to give to God. And then we all kind of went up on top of a hill, and one of the kids blew the stuff up with TNT. And at the end, when I said, "Oh, how did you feel about this today, or what was good for you today?" One of the kids said, "Oh, I really like to know that when I'm worried about something, God can get into my head and blow that up and take it away."
Gosh.
I thought, yeah. So I love it because the kids are creating it. The kids are in charge of it. I've got them texting me at 8:30 in the morning saying, "Sandy, I have to talk to you today sometime. Can we talk after school time? Ring me after school." And they're behind it, and I just send out the emails and make sure people turn up. So that's fantastic.
And it's about play too, that isn't it? It's playful learning.
Well, and it's playful. It's having a go at something. The first time we had a go at it was a bit of a disaster because we didn't realise there were multiple formats, and so we just had a go, saw what worked, had another go, learnt some more, and it's good for the kids to see adults going, "Oh, I don't know how this works. You'll have to help me with that," because it reverses all sorts of power dynamics. It's just brilliant.
Great. So, Mark Telford, what have you been learning, observing about doing stuff online?
Well, I think I guess that question of the seamstress and the seamstress has been in our mind too. One of the things we started right at the beginning, and there are some images you might want to put up, Craig. We decided actually if we wanted to do something online, we wanted it to be open, and also simple and easy for people to participate in. So we set up a prayer group on Facebook, and we just called it Telford Prayer. And we thought, how are we going to make this so that anybody can engage with this? And so I think there's an image somewhere that you'll find out.
Yeah, I've got some.
There's a delay. And so we thought, well, actually, how do we help people? And we thought, right, let's pick 7 words. So we picked 7 words, which I think you should be able to see: grace, peace, mercy, justice, healing, love, and joy. And we said, we'll make each one of those words a meditation for the day. So that's our week. And we're going to engage with people and encourage people to join with us if they want to for 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. That you can have 10 minutes, and we just want you to pray, meditate, reflect, whatever you do in your traditional or non-traditional experience on that word. Because I think the way it came about was we thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if we had, I don't know how many people, everybody of different traditions, and I think we ended up with about 300 or 400 people within the first week joining in with this from all sorts of traditions and faiths, just focusing on the word and praying the word healing or justice or love in our town. And we didn't want to put an agenda on that. We just wanted to say, okay, take that word for that day and let that be your word for that day, each day of the week. And we don't know what might happen. So we decided that we'd set up this Facebook page where people could join in or not, as the case may be. And we'd use, there was a small team of us initially that would post, whether it be an image or a passage or a poem or, something that flowed from that word that folk could just join in with. And what was really interesting was we found that although the majority of folk who were engaging were Christians, we even had two witches joined with us and praying those words, and folk with no faith but just wanted, thought, well, these are good words. I can get on board with this. And as I say, within a week, we had over 300 folk who were participating in this. And actually, the funniest thing was Telford's well known for not having a very big Christian population. And actually, within a week, we'd created, if you like, the largest congregation in the town on Facebook, just by opening that out to people and saying, come and join. And we had that whole thing of, folk could join for the 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening, or they could just have a look at it at lunchtime or whenever they were free to do it. So it had both those aspects of the moments of togetherness. And then there's another image that you might show that talks to the Good Friday Vigil. because obviously this happened before before Easter. So we thought, well, why don't we do an online Good Friday Vigil? So we invited, I think it was about 6 people, to take half an hour each, and to curate half an hour live on Facebook. They could do whatever they wanted for that half an hour, and they curated a half an hour block of this Good Friday Vigil. And we've done a series, several of these since. And what was really interesting was to see that how many people we would get live. And I did what the image that you think you may be seeing now, or you might clicked off it already, was of Stations of the Cross that I did leading up to midnight on Good Friday, which was just simple, an image. You'll see an image and a little story, a little poem that went with that, and it just went up one every 2 minutes, and people watched it live from all over the world. But then watching as one of the administrators, looking at the site and seeing how people participated with that when it wasn't live, and it carried on growing. And some of those things had nearly 1,000 engagements over the next 24 hours. So just that dual sense of saying, well, I'm going to do something that is you can join within the moment, but actually it has a long tail, if you like. It can carry on. And that then sort of, that what I found really interesting is that it didn't just happen in the digital space, but that was beginning to happen in culture, that people were beginning to start things and watch them flow. And it had both the immediate and the long tail, if you like. And there's an image of a pebble snake that happened in our community. And these were happening all over the country in the UK, and I believe other places, where people could do something at home and then leave it on the ground, a painted pebble with a message or a slogan or an image, and just leave it on the ground. And these snakes and areas in our community were growing. So it's really interesting that I think what I began to notice was that the things that we were doing online were actually beginning to manifest themselves in the physical as well. So we found a different way of communicating and a different way of participating by exploring with something digital that then actually became a way of exploring and engaging in the physical world as well. Fun.
Mark, I love the fact that those things are an invitation to the wider community, and they're no strings attached, but they're also designed to speak broadly to people. Whether or not you're Christian, here's something to contemplate. Yeah, it's wonderful, and I also like the art side of it too. That it's not just words. I'm a friend of mine, Lynn Taylor, who's from New Zealand. In her doctorate, she interviewed people who'd come to faith, and the thing that she focused in on was how many people had come to faith through participation in spiritual practices, that their becoming Christian was actually involved trying out something rather than just being told, So it was an embodied kind of exploration of spirituality, I guess is the way to say it. I want to ask, and watching the comments coming in, I want to ask about leadership. So leading stuff online, and whether that's synchronous or asynchronous, is different from leading a group. What have you been learning about creating, curating, but also, in real time leading stuff?
I guess the first thing, if I can go first, Andy, if that's all right, is that we'll all make new mistakes. With new media, we make new mistakes. And, I think with a lot of leadership in the church, things have got very slick and very polished, and we have to get things right. And, we don't want to make mistakes. And actually, when we start playing with the new technology through necessity and opportunity, we make new mistakes, and we get things wrong. And, that the technology doesn't work. Here in the UK, there was a very funny moment that got me absolutely howling when, I don't know if this is true otherwhere, but everyone was doing their services online and trying to replicate church online, and then one Sunday morning at 10:30, Zoom decided to update all its servers and crashed, and watching the panic online was, and I hate to say this, and it sounds awful, but it was amusing, because it was the same panic that had happened only a couple of months earlier when they were told they couldn't meet in the church buildings. And it was like, oh no, we suddenly can't do. We relied on one media, now we're relying on another media. So I think once we kind of got past that initial using the new to do the old, then we're going to make new mistakes. We're going to have to live quite lightly with this. And the number of things that I've been in where the technology hasn't worked, and you have to go, oh, okay, well, it hasn't worked, or there's a lag, and you end up laughing because it's not working properly. And I think that sense of, okay, so we have to live lightly with what we're doing, and allow those mistakes to become part of the experience, or those crashes, or when somebody gets kicked out of Zoom or whatever. They just are what they are. And I think that brings us a lightness that perhaps we're learning, that I hope we can take back into the rest of our experience, that says, well, this is not about professionalism or slickness or getting it right. This is about the values of what we do when we're together. And if that means we have to laugh at ourselves, well, that's good, because that builds community and depth.
Maybe that's grace.
It's been
the fact that mistakes happen, and it's okay. I think part of what I've had to do, what I've found us doing, is pushing at the edges of what technology is made to do. Zoom is, at the beginning, I mean, you'll notice over the last 6 months they've changed how Zoom works, and all sorts of things have become easier and more possible. But we're trying to push the technology to do stuff it's not being created to do, because we're wanting to do slightly different stuff, and also our own ability to know what we're doing. So when you ask about things like leadership, I found myself really early on going, I've got to sit here and work out I've got to learn how to do this to make it happen in the kind of production kind of way. Once I got to the point of feeling comfortable and knowing what I was doing, then it was actually really easy to do that with others, and to get others on board and kind of be embracive and inclusive and inviting into the leadership. It was harder to do that at the beginning. So I think that's been really lovely over time to be able to do that, because now I've got more of an idea of what I'm doing. I can teach others.
And there's there's the technological hump, and then there's the creative side and the confidence side, I suppose, as well. So it's been interesting being in a presbytery of 60 churches where we, early on, I think we wanted to go and help everyone do it well, and then we went, no, wait a minute, just let people go and experiment and play and have a go and learn themselves, and if they come and ask for help, fine, but this is the time to actually learn by trying stuff. So
if I think back to like 15 years ago when we started having laptops in classrooms, at the start of my teaching career, probably more than, let's say 20 years ago, because I'm getting old. But, we were doing, at the forefront of doing that with LOTE, and trying to work out how you got computers to speak in Chinese and write in Chinese. And so, but we had planning time. You'd go, oh, we're going to start doing that in January. So the year before you'd have your computer, and you'd have a year to kind of go, how's this going to work, and blah, 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 blah. Well, we went on, Tuesday, okay, we're going to be doing digital church on Sunday. Wham! There was no leading, no planning, no how does this work, no what does the technology do. So that's been the other bit, as it's taken us, I think there's been 6 months of learning that's gone on, and some graciousness from our communities as they've watched us doing that, which has been lovely.
One of the things we discovered is about the technology. I'll come back to the leadership thing in a second, but one of the things we discovered is about misusing Zoom and things like that, as you like, which I love the fact that we can actually subvert a piece of it, of technology, and say, well, we discovered that, that if you create a recurring meeting, and you don't have a waiting room that people can actually go in without the host, anybody can go in at any time. The meeting is just ongoing.
Oh, okay.
And so basically we just set up a recurring meeting for Safe Space. And so even though it's in my account, anybody can pop up in that and can go into that room at any time, and 2 or 3 can gather and have a conversation or pray together in that Zoom space, even when me as the leader who has the Zoom account isn't there and doesn't even have my computer switched on. And I think, so actually learning how to allow people to subvert the technology and do what they want with it is and I love what you're doing with Minecraft and in the sense subverting that. and changing the way the logic works and the way that things work. So, and I think one of the things that we've explored with leadership generally as a community is that leadership is seasonal. And my role as the main leader, if you like, for want of a better phrase, is as a curator of leadership. So, it is my role to actually release other people in leadership at the right moment, at the right time, both for them and for the community. And so understanding this is where I need to release you. And I think that creates a different, when we're creating we're in a different context, that we need to allow people to lead because they've got skills or to create space for them. So I think, Sandy, in terms of things like, you mentioned the Minecraft stuff, and saying, well, I don't know how it works. Well, actually, as a leader, to enter into a space where we don't get it, and we have to release leadership to others who do get it, the young, and Douglas Rushkoff years ago, American Jewish, wrote a book called Children of Chaos, and he said, that as we enter into if we're an immigrant entering into a new land, it's the kids who learn the language and the culture first. The older generation try and hold on to their language and culture. But the young learn to actually to bring together their historic culture with the new culture that they're experiencing. And we see that in music and art and and so on. So here is an opportunity to say, well, how do we release those who are digital natives to be our new leaders, even if we struggle with the chaos of that?
Yeah, look, I love it when someone says, "Oh, look, I'd never know how to do that." I go, "That's a fantastic opportunity," because someone in your community, at the local school, whatever, they know how to do it. 15-year-old knows how to do that, or a 9-year-old, or whatever it is.
And isn't that wonderful?
And mistakes are really just learning opportunities anyway, says the old teacher. They're just an opportunity to learn something new. So go and make them.
In terms of leadership stuff, I mean, I'm between what the two of you have done, there's a spectrum between doing some stuff that is carefully prepared and well presented, because learning to lead contemplative stuff, whether it's face-to-face or online, requires some requires a careful touch, requires some lightness. Okay, you've seen that Dalek relaxation video. You will all relax now. So there's something, and Sandy, the images I've seen of your stuff is, for you to set up a contemplative place well at your end helps people at the other end.
Well, that's right. And the other lovely thing that's happened, you've got some images there where a couple of the people, these are Liz White's ones, but not just, so I've got even now while I'm sitting here, I've got my candle kind of on the desk as I'm doing this to remind me of the presence of God. You can't quite see it because it's off the screen in this space, but if you can see.
I've got this.
Oh, Bubblehead Jesus, fantastic. Fantastic. So, but Liz White's beautiful little, if you can see them, I don't know if you found them, Craig, image of her little prayer station. So while we're doing online church, she's set up, and it's just on a corner of her table. It's not big. It's a candle and some flowers. And so we sent those around the news, newsletter to the network and said, have a think about what you put around you as you worship. You're not just looking at a screen. You're actually curating the space around you. It doesn't have to be big. It can just be in front of you on the desk, So just you can see it's just a tiny corner of a table. It's not big or grand or anything, but as we pray together, she's able to light tapers and light tea light candles, and she's got some lovely flowers sitting there. Liz is the kind of person who is really into nature and goes bike riding, and she's a former outdoor ed teacher, so nature's really important to her. So she's created this space, really simple space on her table, and the gift of being, I wasn't the one who said to people in the network, oh, this is a good idea for you. It was actually Liz doing it, sharing it with others, encouraging others to do it, which I love as a kind of lay-led resource.
Coming back to leadership again, so Mark, I mean, we have a bit of an affinity because way back in the day we were both trying to make little videos with music and meditations and that kind of stuff, and you've kept doing that. So I mean, one of the ways that you lead is by making stuff and putting it out there that people can then access in different ways and different times, and that the Facebook thing you just showed us too. I mean that's creating something that people can just access when they want to. There's a lightness around. Here it is. I almost don't even own it. I'm just putting it out there for you.
Yeah, and I think there's something about that. There's an interesting thing, which is it's both light and persistent, in the sense that when we publish something, it's hard, it's finished, it's a book or and it's there and it's concrete, and people can take it and read it, whatever. But I think one of the things that we found with stuff that's online is there's a lightness to it, which I can put stuff out there, and I can put lots of stuff out there, and people can jump in and out of it or whatever. I mean, a couple of years ago, actually, really, and I'm going to use one of them later. I decided, after being told all my life that I wasn't a writer. I was an artist. I made images and so on. I decided I was going to write, so I started writing poetry and just put it out there on Facebook. And it actually blew that open for me, because I put it out there, and what, it would both be there. It would disappear. It would fall off people's walls. So it wasn't like there, and I didn't feel exposed by it. But actually, it stayed there, and people could react to it over a period of time. And that's odd, because it is both light and persistent. But I think, in one sense, because there's so much out there, one could just do that, and one could explore. And during lockdown, actually, it's not really to do with spirituality or church, but we started making music and actually recording songs, and it was so easy to do. And then just creating a little video or an image that went behind it. I mean, just cover versions of our favourite songs, just for fun, for something to do. And it was, so we basically, and I'm sure you've seen other musicians do this, where, I record a bass line or a guitar part, and somebody else records a vocal at home, and then we just whack it all together in a simple online mixer or whatever, and stick it on in a private YouTube channel. So there's an opportunity to actually explore and experiment and play with things, knowing that they will disappear off people's walls. They can go, but they are actually there, and people can engage with them. So I like that. It takes some of the fear out of what what we're doing when we're being creative, and allows us to play more.
And I mean, I like the fact that most of the universe has got a smartphone that can take photos. And we've had the Lent photo a day and the Advent photo a day thing, where you can say to your faith community, we've got a theme for the week or the day. When you're out and about, take a picture and post it.
Yeah.
And if you want to add some couple of words to it, or a Bible verse or whatever, that's fine. But we can all actually be, that thing of inviting people to be creative out of their own person and life and spiritual journey, not just, oh gosh, I've got to make it all. So I was doing a retreat a few months ago, and we're doing stuff about creation. So I sent people outside to find a place to sit and contemplate creation, be thankful, take a photo, SMS it back to me. By the time they got back to the worship space, I had a scrolling thing of their images with some music playing, and that became our contemplation together, and we could have done that online or anywhere. It was so I think like inviting people to respond. Mark, that Facebook thing of yours, could people comment on those in those groups, pages? Yep. Okay.
Yeah. I loved it. I did it from here. I found that really moving, actually. That your Easter Good Friday thing, it was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
It was one of the foreigners that was watching, the non-Telford people.
Yeah.
I'm watching. I'm watching the comments going past.
Yeah, I'm going to have to concentrate on reading them later.
No, that's fine. Folks, we're not going to talk about child safety today. If you want to talk about it later, that's fine. But understand that issue about it was the open Zoom rooms that sparked some comments about safety, Mark, and that's an important thing. But we're not going to touch on that here at the moment. But if you've got a comment or a question about what we've just talked about before we go to our final topic, topics? What do you want to ask?
I will just say, I think, just to clarify, the open Zoom rooms were not open to anybody.
The public, yes.
They weren't a public Zoom rooms. They were our communities, our small communities. I think the issue of digital safety, I've got a son who's currently off school and doing lessons online because of, COVID and having to do digital and online safety and safeguarding is really important. So I think that is a major issue, and there is lots of stuff out there on that. So please just be reassured, this wasn't just a public space; it was a community open Zoom that people could come in and out of.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Your question about Facebook groups or pages or something else, I tend to use pages these days mostly. And the reason for that, again, is that pages are open and people can find them. Groups can be groups can be open, I guess, but I've almost exclusively stopped using groups and started using pages because, again, I'm wanting people from beyond the community to see what's going on and for wanting it to be transparent. It's like having a great big glass wall on the front of the building, you want everyone to be able to see what's going on.
We use both pages and groups, and I think particularly as a community, we used a group so that we could pray about sensitive issues and folk who were not well, and also arranging things like shopping for other people and some of the stuff that we arrange. So we have both a page, we use both pages that are open and groups where we need a certain degree of privacy or security in terms of maybe praying for somebody and putting issues up there. So yeah, we've used both.
I'm liking Nicole's question there too about how do you make sacred spaces which are just in the digital space. And I know, Nicole, that's something you're working on doing at the moment. And I think you want to be able to create community as well as be open. So I suspect part of my answer to that would be you might do parts in an open space like on Facebook and then do other parts that are more private like Zoom. So the space community worships online, and then there's a Zoom conversation. So in fact, you can, if you're hanging around on the online thing, and I see you quite a bit, then often I've invited people to join the Zoom. We've had new people come and do that. But and it's really interesting for me. The very first week we did Zoom after church, kind of the coffee thing. We sat there going, oh, this is crap. Who wants to be on Zoom? Gee, it was much nicer, with David making us coffee in the sycamore tree. But 6 months in, we're all going, oh, thank God we can talk to each other, and the conversations have become the kind of deep, spiritual, lovely conversations that they were in the sycamore tree. The coffee's still not as good as when David makes it, but otherwise, it's as good. So you can do both the private, intimate, sacred conversation of a small group, and you can do the more open public things. You just need to be thinking about what technology you're using for what, and use the technology. Use a number of different platforms in a number of different ways, I think is my answer to that.
And I think there's also the synchronous, asynchronous thing there as well. Like it's not hard to set up a web page that people could access, which has got, video clip, some reflection, even something to do. And people can access it any time, and then at some point you want to say, okay, we want to gather and reflect on that or talk about that. So that's, I think that's probably part of the decision too about what you do, how and when. So I want to cut to the last bit, which is in our church, and Mark, I know in your church as well, we've had this whole thing about online communion, which I don't want to get into. But Marty, I have read what Johnny Baker said about it. That's fine. But people seem to be nervous about whether, is God in the digital environment? And I don't even know what that question means. But I'm interested in your reflection. Because God's not, obviously Apple computers were inspired by. Anyway, it's a question about people's experience of God, spirituality, in this mediated sense, So what are your thoughts about how people experience God in this like, I don't want to say that in the online world, because there's no such thing. You're in the world and I'm in the world. We just happen to have a computer screen between us. But what are your thoughts, and even what you're seeing about people's experience of God, experience of the spiritual life in these mediated settings? Was there a question in that? I hope there was.
I don't know. I'm not. I guess God in many ways exists in the gaps and in the interactions of relationships and engagements and creativity and so on. And I think there is a sense for me that, look, the way we interact, the medium that we choose to interact, may be part of the message, and that may be part of how we choose to find new ways to interact. But it's still actually human to human interaction, and so actually God is present in all of that. I think. I don't see why not. I mean, I find that some of the debates, that, as I say, the Marshall McLuhan put about the age of anxiety, because we're trying to use yesterday's tools for today's context. And I think that there is something of that. And I'm always struck. I come back to one of my favourite little passages in Scripture, in Jeremiah 29. Where the people in exile are desperate to get back to the synagogue system of the temple and all of that, the story. And God says, no. Look, here is where you are. Plant gardens, start businesses, start families, get married, pray and work for the peace and prosperity of Babylon, because this is where I put you, and your peace and prosperity is bound in with theirs. And there's something about, well, actually, that's the same with the digital world, which is we may long to get back, but actually God's saying, no, plant gardens. Plant gardens in this digital space. Start businesses in this digital space. I am as present in this alien land. So, the Psalm, how do we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Let's engage with that, rather than saying, well, does the old stuff work in the new? It's like, well, that's irrelevant. What matters is, how do I plant the seeds of spirituality? How do I plant the seeds? How do I dig and uncover the nurturing of God and the flourishing of God in the now and in the moment and in this place? Because God, are we going to box God so much that we think God can't interact and can't engage with us because we're looking at a computer screen and Bluetooth to heaven and back? I just don't get that.
Yeah, if there's any message I've been hearing loudly and clearly in the last few weeks, it's to stop that thing about, what are we going to do when we're in COVID normal? How are we going to be when we're able to, how are we going to do that? It's almost like this is just a blip between, and I can see why in March, when we thought we were going to be back in church by Easter, it did feel like a short blip and you could hold your breath and we'd get back to it. But this is now a whole world, and we need to actually be living in the world the way the world is. And we don't know when we're going to get back, and we don't know what getting back's going to look like. So, yes, I think God is calling us to be where we are and plant gardens and nourish faith here and now. You put that eloquently, Mark. That's very much the message I've been hearing from God, I think, in the last month or so.
I heard from sorry, Mark, go on.
I was just going to say, and on a really practical and flipping this about a bit, we have a young lady who's part of our community who suffers from all sorts of illnesses, fibromyalgia, ME, and so on. And actually, this exploring church in the digital space has been wonderful for her, because she's not fit to travel. She gets anxiety about, can I get out of my home and get to a meeting or whatever. So suddenly, all that anxiety has been lifted off, because she can just press a button and she's there and she's in and she's relating and she's engaging and she's praying, and that's been liberating for her. So there's a real positive to that as well.
You reminded me of I heard of a minister in New Zealand who he's got a practice with a group in his church who they go walking at 6 a.m. So they're COVID separated. They all go for a half-hour walk at 6 a.m. They take a photo on their walk, and then they get together and talk about the last half hour together. So they do a half-hour pre-walk outdoors, beginning of the day, and I just think that's wonderful.
It's a lovely idea.
It's simple. It combines the physical and the digital. It's it's solo and it's interactive, there's something about that, and to do that as a rhythm as well. So there's that opportunity. And I suppose I want to come back to the thing of intentionality. That because what I've heard you both just say then is, let's not kind of think about going back. Let's think about the here and the now, and the being intentional about being church in this time and this place, and connecting that with the spiritual practice stuff. Yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And helping people to continue to grow in faith exactly where they are right now. And that's what, as I say, has been particularly lovely about my little Holy Habits prayer group that I've had at Scott's, because they've just been praying together and sharing with each other their prayer habits they've been developing and growing in that extraordinarily. So there's been the individual practice of prayer, which is different for each of them, because each of them likes a different prayer and finds a different medium works for them. But there's the shared online digital element of us sharing that together. So it's both and. One of them has had some fairly nasty knee surgery earlier in the year, and she has to use one of those Pilates machines, and the breath prayer and the Taizé prayer that we were doing was helping her on her Pilates machine. And now that would never have occurred to me, but she came on, she said, there's this thing, I was finding myself really resenting having to go and do my Pilates, but now I get on the machine with my Taizé chants, or I get on and do my breath prayer, and suddenly I've done twice as many as I was meant to, and I'm really improving. So, it can be a wonderful thing in all sorts of ways if people creatively think about it.
Great. We're going to round up in a minute. Wonderful conversation. I'd love to keep talking, but we can't. And Mark, you're hanging out for breakfast, I know, at this particular point in time. So in a moment, folks, we're going to finish with... Actually, let's do that first. I asked Mark and Sandy to provide a way to begin and close. So before I thank our guests, I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's going to lead us in a closing activity, and I'm going to try and get my end to work, Mark. So just give me a second.
So very simple. I mean, hopefully simple, although we are dealing with a lag. So it might be a bit complicated, but if it all gets a little bit out of sync, it doesn't really matter. We're entering into the period of Advent. We're in autumn, and I think also, in the world that we are in at the moment, there's a whole sense of uncertainty. And we've started already, but that's okay. Don't start the music yet.
No, it's okay.
Okay. So the whole sense of uncertainty, and I was just thinking about Advent, autumn, the uncertainty of not knowing where we are. And so I thought, and also this thing about contemplation, about stillness and waiting. So there are going to be, I think it's 4 or 5 images with short little snippets of Bible text on it, a poem, and some music, all that we've written, just to reflect and be still. We sometimes think about the digital space as high technology, which is active and all singing, all dancing and flashy. And I think actually finding the stillness in the digital space is challenging but rich. So when you're ready, if you begin the music. Waiting. Waiting is all. It feels so close, but the waiting is just beginning. Now I must be calm. For the earth has just begun to rest. The leaves have just fallen. The cold has just begun to drift in on the wind. The season of sleep is still creeping in. There is a long wait ahead. Patience. Waiting. Waiting is all. It feels like there is so much to do, but now is not the moment. Not right now. Now I must be still. Catch my breath and let it linger inside. Feel the moment and hold back my desperation for the dawn. Light will flow in time. There is a long wait ahead. Patience. Waiting. Waiting is all. Sometimes my frustration is hard to still. Inertia everywhere and I scream for change. But now I must trust. The vision will not die. It isn't mine to force into life. I know there must be change coming. I feel it in the shifting colours, hear it in far-off conversations. But there is a long wait ahead. Patience. Waiting. Waiting is all. All I have right now is the wait. Uncertainty rattles, anticipation in front of me, hope and fear bound in a spinning endless second. Now I must watch, to learn to know beyond my need, to stand guard while conflict rages and hear the cries of battle. I need to understand. There is a long wait ahead. Patience. Waiting. Waiting is all. But waiting is not nothing. It is everything. It is drawing deep on all that is to be born. Now I must have faith, for faith is all that's left. We are perishing. We are being remade far away. I am being remade in my hidden places. The sun will break my horizon. The day will come. There is a long way ahead. Patience. Waiting. Waiting is all. Not long to go now.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks to both of you for this time. Really enjoyed the conversation. We could talk for ages about a whole lot more stuff and more of your stories and insights. Really appreciate the interaction between the two of you. Different stories, different places, but a bunch of common themes that have come through. So thanks for your time. And thanks to those who've dropped in to see us today. We saved the video. We cut out, no, we don't. We might edit it a little bit, but it'll be available online for you to see, and you can go and look at it later on. So just that'll be on our Presbytery our Presbytery YouTube page, as well as here on Facebook. So there'll be this version on Facebook and the slightly edited down version on YouTube.
Be great to go back and read the questions and see what people have said.
Yep. And thanks for the participation online. We appreciate that very much. Thank you, Mark. Go and have some breakfast. Sandy, go and put the dinner on or whatever it is. Great to have you.
Thank you very much. See you later, guys.
Thank you. So long.
Bye.